I'm curious about you've created a movement vocabulary that's specific to your style, your choreography, and does that vocabulary shift and change for each piece, or is it you kind of have your vocabulary that you kind of pick and choose from that you've developed?
I would say that my vocabulary retains similar characteristics from piece to piece in terms of overall my intent for using movement as a language. So my intent is to create movements that speak directly to the context of what it is that I'm talking about or working with, or which dancer I'm attempting to deliver, or the piece of music that I'm connecting with. So it's not like I have a canon of like 100 steps and then I just reorganize the order of how I put them together. But I would say the things that define my language are, well, number one would be my interest in using the entire body and all of the pieces within it. So rather than just using an arm, I am really interested in a wrist and an elbow and a shoulder and the fact that we have 10 fingers. And I think typically technical dance vocabulary works more in like chunks of the body. And the idea that we have all of these bones and ridges and using them to add greater detail to existing technical movements. Mm-hmm. So that's something that stays with me from work to work, but it's definitely, I feel like I try to create a language that's specific to each context and work, especially when I'm moving between working with contemporary dancers and working with ballet dancers or working with women on point, or certain things change, and what I take from ballet and what I take from modern dance really depends on the dancer that I'm working with as well.
Interesting. So I'm interested, the windows in my closest window, sorry, about your background as far as what inspired you most. What was your
that one's open too.
Oh, it is tiny. Something was wrong with that.
It might not go. We'll also have to deal with that.
Okay. So, like, when you were growing up, what was your training, and what inspired you and like pulled you forward into where you are now?
Something that's interesting is I've always wondered if I would have ever found dance if my mother wasn't a ballet teacher. And I always am curious when I see male dancers who don't come from a dance family in any capacity, how they ever got there, like who thinks to put their boy in dance. So that's something that I find really interesting. For me, I was born into it. My mom gave birth to me, and like weeks later I was at the studio with her while she was teaching. So she put me in tap dance first because I could make noise and have fun, and then she put me into ballet from there, then jazz, Ukrainian, Highland dance, musical theater, modern dance, hip-hop, I basically did absolutely everything. And I liked ballet the least. I only ever did it because I had to, and I understood the value of it because people told me the value of it, not necessarily because I really understood the value of it. So I resented it and kind of moved away from that, and I always thought I was going to be a commercial dancer. So my whole goal was to move to LA and dance for Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake and be in music videos and world tours, and I lived for that. But I also loved improvising, and I used to go on stage since the time that I was 7 years old, and I would improvise solos. And my improvised solos were always very much in the vein of modern dance and very experimental, especially for a child. So I think that inherent within me was this interest in movement exploration and contemporary expression through my body. And the more, I guess the older I got, and the more I used that as a vehicle to express my artistic interests, the further I moved away from commercial dance. And it became something that I only ever did to make paychecks every so often to support my artistic work. And then I I went to ballet school for 6 months after I graduated high school, just for extra technical training, but left. I didn't like being in that environment. I didn't like the rigidity of it, and I knew I wanted to be a choreographer, so I didn't think I needed that. And then when I met Wendy Whalen, and she invited me to be a part of her project, then I was like, if I'm going to be on stage with Wendy Whalen, I'm going to take ballet class every day. And so for the past 3 years, I've pretty well taken ballet class every day. I try to go 5 times a week, and it's really changed the way that I look at movement. And I've started to work more with ballet dancers as a result of training myself in that vein. But but I still feel like my language is very much a contemporary dance language, but I understand and value ballet as a foundation for what is required to do my work. That was a long, complicated answer, sorry.
Yes, awesome. Well, that kind of leads me into the next question, which is, I know that you started a company, Move, in Vancouver,
Yes.
right? And then you moved the company, or it moved here, but I don't know if you brought your dancers with you.
Yes.
Or some of them, maybe, and some, I don't know. So
When I was 17, I founded a company called Move the Company in Vancouver. And it consisted of basically all my friends who I grew up doing dance competitions with. And the first year we met 3 times a week. It was just sort of like a volunteer thing, but very soon I started getting funding. We started getting presenter interest. I started creating full-length works and mixed bill programs, and within a very short amount of time we were touring the world, and we had at one point a 42-week season one year. It was, and I think at that point in time I was maybe 22. But I was literally getting up at 7, picking up dancers in our minivan to go and rehearse in some theater on a residency, and then rehearsing with the company all day long because I danced in the work myself. And then as soon as we finished rehearsals, I was probably going somewhere to teach to make more money to pay for what the company was doing. And then I was doing administration till 3 o'clock in the morning, and then doing it again for 7 years, that pattern basically. And I was just so exhausted that when I encountered Wendy and she offered me this opportunity, I was like, so you want me to choreograph something on you, dance in it with you, and you're going to pay me to do it. That sounds like everything I'm trying to do myself, but on a greater scale with way less stress. And so that's when I was like, I'm going to take this opportunity to put the activity of my company a bit to rest and just focus on being the best dancer that I can be, refining my work with this great artist, and being in New York City and seeing how that changes me and changes my work. And so we did some projects with the company here. I engaged some dancers here outside of what I've done with Wendy. I've done some stuff back in Canada, and it's basically just become, the company still exists as a nonprofit charity in Canada. We do a lot of educational programming with youth. We do a summer intensive. And we produce work, but the dancers who dance, there's no longer a full-time company of dancers, and the dancers who I engage live anywhere from London, where I'm working a lot now, to New York, to San Francisco, to Toronto, to Vancouver, Chicago. They're everywhere. And we would just kind of fly them together to do projects.
Yeah.
And then I get to work with the people who interest me without having the responsibility of having to sustain their employment year-round, which is a better fit for me at this point in my life.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation about that. And I know Ken wants me to, but I'm interested in some other things too. But so jumping off into the movement vocabulary. So Ken is looking at kind of the choreographers that he sees really sort of sifting to the top right now, and creating language that really moves and speaks to their audience in a way that, people have been doing movement exploration, deconstruction stuff, postmodern work for a while now, and not much has necessarily resonated. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, resonated with the audience, or I don't think the longevity necessarily is there either. You leave the theater feeling, as an audience member and as a dancer, you're like, oh, that's interesting. That's that's cool to watch. And then that's it.
Yeah.
You know, it's just sort of that hollow, like candy. Like, yeah, that's like eye candy, but it's not hitting me anywhere deeper than here. And Ken really sees in your work that you're bringing to it, you know, deep substance as well. So you're using your language that you created to communicate, actually, and it really hits the bullseye. It seems like. I guess, you know, okay, so when so I was going to say, are you an idea, like do you start with an idea, but you said you start with the music, basically, or how do you start when you approach a piece?
Usually when I start to approach the creation of the full work, it's the music that comes first. I will be given, say, like Wendy coming to me and saying, I want you to make a duet for us about this long. The first thing that I think is, well, what music might work for that? Not what is the relationship that she and I are going to have, whatever, or, so music comes first. And I just listen to the music anywhere, doing anything. Like I say, I try to make the music the soundtrack to my life, so that I see how the music is connected to what I'm feeling at this point or what I want to talk about. So I'll listen to it while I'm looking at people on the subway, I'll walk around the city, I'll play around with it. But very rarely will I begin generating phrasing to that music. Then usually I'll go and make phrasing to anything from like salsa to techno to Bach to whatever. And then I'll come back with those phrases and start playing with them to the music that I'm making the piece to. And for me, what that does is it creates movement that rides the music rather than sitting in the music. And it gives an air of unpredictability so that everything isn't so obvious. And it allows me room to play with the music for the piece once I've made the phrasing, because they're not married, they're just coexisting. And then I take, depending on what the piece is, if it's a solo, then that's the extent of what it is. If it's a duet, I'll often take that phrasing, divide it amongst the dancers, have them complete some of the movement onto each other's bodies. Sometimes I've had them do two totally different phrases side by side and find points where it seems like they're naturally connecting, and then I reorient the movement to turn it into partnering. Or I'll make generic partnering with very little detail, and then I'll say, well, you're doing that, I want you to achieve those phrases I taught you earlier. So my process, I guess, is constantly, the base movement phrasing is about what comes out of me naturally. Then how I apply that movement to a work is layering and deconstructing and evolving and morphing. But never from a point where I'm like, this piece is about being sad, so like, let's make the movement really sad. It's basically where it's like this language together. When the two of you are doing it together, I sense visuals of something cutting or something that appears to cause you pain, or a sense of loss, or a deeply romantic engagement. And then that's how I see what the relationship is within the piece and what the piece is really trying to communicate. I had one of my earliest commissions was on Toronto Dance Theatre, and the director said to me, he said, my best advice to you is to look at your work and see what's there, not what you expected you were going to make. And I think that's a really valuable thing to consider in creation, is that what is actually there, what you've actually made, might be so far away from what you set out to make, but that is what you've made, and that is what you're making. And so I try to stay really open with allowing what I'm making to become something that's on the other end of the world from what I thought. So trying to get too married to conceptual ideas.
Interesting. Yeah. And do you when you're in the studio working, do you do a lot of improvisation with your dancers on the spot, or do you come up with phrases?
Almost none.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I would say that I do almost no improvisation with my dancers or process. I come in usually with phrasing pre-set, teach it to them, And then I allow an ample amount of room and use them in the manipulation of turning the phrases into other things. So I might say to them, I want you to take the phrase that I just taught you, and whatever I did with my arms, now you're doing that with your legs, and whatever I did with my legs, now you're doing with your arms. They've completely inverted the phrase into something that looks nothing like what I taught them, but is exactly what I taught them, reoriented through the way that they perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would never have them say, I would never say, go make a duet about like joy, and then show it to me, and then I'll put my name on it. Because to me, part of what retains the aesthetic of my work is the fact that it originated from my coordination at some point. So anything that I'm asking the dancers to do with the movement is what they're doing, is as a result of what they're doing. What they're doing is as a result of intaking my body, and taking my body and using their mind and their body to have a conversation with what I gave them, as opposed to me taking something that's theirs exclusively just because of a word I said or something like that. Not to negate other people working that way, but it's just, to me, it's not authentic to who I am as a creator. So I'm not interested in working that way.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and that's what Ken was noticing. This is, what he really zeroed in on too is that you're communicating. Not only if it's a solo, you're still communicating with something. It's like there's a conversation going on with whatever it is, whatever it is. And if there's someone else there, then there's absolutely a conversation always happening. But whatever the movement and conversation is, it's resonating very clearly, with it's not just watching people move. It's,
right.
There's absolutely a deeper connective, emotional connection that happens.
And I do appreciate that a lot, that observation, because even if my pieces start out very abstract from a purely physical place, I believe that actions always say something. Anything anyone does with their body language, that's what it is. And so if something is not communicating to me, it's distinctly not communicating to me. It's communicating to me a sense of boredom or a sense of disinterest or disassociation. And so the engagement and resonance of what actions leave us with are of my, I guess, primary artistic concern. And once the piece is set and the movement has been settled into something, then it's very much about something for me. And the pieces have very clear ideas and messages and feelings that I'm trying to communicate, and I will direct the dancers within that movement, almost like actors delivering lines in a play. So then the intent, my direction process moves very much to that of almost like a theater director, even if my work is highly kinetic and virtuosic and not, because it's also so gestural. Mm-hmm. I think they need to understand what those actions are saying inherently to someone. Like me putting my arm out to you is going to communicate something to you regardless, and whether I did it like this or like this is a world of a difference in what you're going to take away, or whether you'll take anything away from it. And so I really work with my dancers to help them understand that level of introspection.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the, so glad to hear it. After dancing for so long and being just, given empty stuff, it's just like, I feel like maybe we should move to maybe some movement.
Sure.
Let's see. Let me just change the location here. I may